The giant space station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness between stars. It was bigger than most cities on Earth. Thousands of lights blinked across its surface like glowing dots. Inside the station, aliens from all over the galaxy came to meet and make important decisions. The main meeting room was huge. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds could form inside it. Strange creatures filled the seats. Some looked like walking trees with glowing bark. Others were made of living crystal that changed colors when they moved. A few looked like giant birds with metal feathers that clinked when they shifted. High, Chancellor Vexstar stood at the center of the room. His body was made of clear crystal that bent light into rainbow patterns. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. He was the leader of the Zilithian Empire, one of the most powerful groups in the galaxy. "We meet today to discuss a new problem," Vexstar announced. His crystal form grew brighter as he spoke. "A small blue planet in a system they call Sol. The creatures there call themselves humans." The room filled with clicking sounds, chirps, and musical notes. This was how different alien species laughed. Commander Thizes of the Raptoran fleet stood up. She looked like a giant bird with sharp metal claws and bright yellow eyes that could see in complete darkness. "I have studied these humans," Thizes said. Her voice was sharp, like the cry of a hunting bird. "They are very primitive. They only learned to travel faster than light 3 months ago. Their ships are made of simple metal held together with sticky tape and hope." More laughter filled the room. Representative Gorth of the Silicon Coalition made a sound like rocks grinding together. "Why are we even talking about such simple creatures?" he asked. His body looked like a walking mountain made of living stone. "They barely qualify as intelligent life." Thizes continued her report. "Their biggest warship is smaller than our scout ships. They have no energy shields to protect them. Their weapons still use chemical explosions instead of plasma beams. They fight by throwing metal projectiles at their enemies." The laughter grew louder. Some aliens made sounds like breaking glass. Others hummed deep notes that shook the floor. The whole room seemed to think humans were a big joke. "But they have sent us messages," said another alien. This one looked like a floating jellyfish made of light. "They want to meet us. They talk about peace and working together." "Peace," Thizes screeched. "They are always fighting each other on their little planet. They make weapons out of everything. They even fight over which invisible beings to worship." High Chancellor Vexstar raised one crystal arm for silence. The room became quiet, except for the soft humming of the station's air systems. "These humans are clearly not ready to join civilized society," he said. "They are too violent and too primitive." "What should we do when their diplomats arrive next week?" asked Representative Gorth. Vexstar's crystal body pulsed with bright light as he made his decision. "We will classify Earth as a protected primitive zone. No direct contact until they evolve past throwing rocks at their problems. When their diplomats come, we will politely tell them to go home and grow up first." The vote was quick. Almost every alien agreed. Only a few small species voted against the decision, and their votes did not matter much. The humans would be turned away like children asking to sit at the adult table. What none of the aliens knew was that a human was listening to every word they said. Dr. Sarah Chun sat in a small room aboard the human diplomatic ship Endeavor. The ship floated near the edge of the Nexus Prime system, waiting for permission to approach. Dr. Chun was Earth's best expert on alien languages and cultures. She had spent years preparing for this moment. Her computer screens showed waves of alien radio signals. For months, she had been teaching her translation programs to understand alien languages. The computer was learning faster than anyone expected. It could now understand most of what the aliens were saying to each other. Dr. Chun listened to the entire meeting through hidden microphones that the aliens did not know about. She heard every insult, every laugh, every cruel joke about her species. Her face showed no emotion, but her hands slowly formed fists. Primitive, she whispered to herself. Throwing rocks at problems. She thought about human history. Yes, humans fought wars. But they also built beautiful cities, wrote amazing poetry, and sent music into space, hoping aliens would hear it. They created art that moved people to tears and invented medicines that saved millions of lives. The aliens saw only the violence. They missed everything else that made humans special. Captain Maria Santos entered the small room. She was the leader of the diplomatic mission, a woman who had spent her whole life dreaming of meeting aliens. Sarah, have you learned anything from their communications? Dr. Chun looked at her captain. She could tell her the truth about what the aliens really thought. Or she could lie and let Captain Santos keep her dreams for a few more days. They're still discussing our request, Dr. Chun said. It was not exactly a lie. We should know their decision soon. Captain Santos smiled. I'm so excited. Imagine what we could learn from civilizations that are thousands of years older than us. Think of the technology they could share, the problems they could help us solve. Dr. Chun nodded, but said nothing. She turned back to her screens and continued listening to the alien conversations. She learned which species controlled the most military ships, which ones made the best weapons, which ones were afraid of the others. Most importantly, she learned that the aliens had become soft. They had not fought a real war in over 500 years. They talked about honor and civilization, but they had forgotten what it meant to struggle. For survival. The meeting at Nexus Prime ended with formal documents being prepared. Earth would be classified as a primitive world. Humans would be told to come back in a few hundred years, when they had learned to behave like proper civilized beings. Dr. Chun saved every recording. She copied every translation. She memorized the names of every alien leader who had laughed at humanity. When the formal rejection came, she would be ready. 3 days later, the Endeavor received its answer. High Chancellor Vextar himself appeared on their main screen. His crystal body sparkled with what looked like amusement. People of Earth, he said in perfect English, we have reviewed your request to join our galactic community. Unfortunately, your species is not yet ready for such responsibility. You are too young, too violent, and too primitive to understand the complex nature of interstellar relations. Captain Santos opened her mouth to respond, but Vextar continued. Return to your small planet and practice being civilized. Learn to solve problems without violence. Develop better technology. Perhaps in a few centuries, you will be mature enough to join the adult species of the galaxy. The transmission ended. Captain Santos stared at the blank screen with tears in her eyes. Around her, the other human diplomats sat in shocked silence. They had come so far and hoped for so much. Dr. Chun stood up slowly. Captain, I need to send a message to Earth immediately. What kind of message? The kind that tells them exactly what these aliens think of us, Dr. Chun said. Her voice was very calm, but her eyes were hard as steel. And the kind that suggests we should probably do something about it. The message Dr. Chun sent to Earth was short but clear. It contained recordings of the alien meeting, translations of their conversations, and a detailed analysis of their military capabilities. At the bottom, she added her own recommendation. Earth needs to prepare, she wrote, not to become what they want us to be, but to show them what we really are. The seeds of humanity's response were planted in that moment. The galaxy had made its first and greatest mistake. They had insulted the one species that turned every insult into motivation, every rejection into determination, and every challenge into an opportunity to prove them wrong. 6 months had passed since the aliens rejected humanity's request to join their galactic community. During that time, humans had been busy. They built new ships, trained new crews, and studied everything they could learn about alien technology. Dr. Sarah Chun now worked as Earth's chief alien expert. She spent her days learning more alien languages and studying their military tactics. She had not forgotten the insults she heard at Nexus Prime. Neither had anyone else on Earth. Then something terrible happened in the galaxy. A new enemy appeared from the edge of space. The aliens called them the Devourers. These creatures were like a disease that spread from planet to planet, eating everything in their path. The Devourers looked like a mix of metal and living flesh. Their ships could change shape and heal themselves when damaged. They consumed entire worlds, leaving behind only dead rocks floating in space. 12 star systems had already fallen to their endless hunger. The Galactic Confederation was panicking. These aliens who had laughed at human violence were now facing real war for the first time in centuries. Their pretty ships with shining hulls were being torn apart by creatures that knew only destruction. High Chancellor Vexstar called an emergency meeting at Nexus Prime. The great station was now surrounded by warships from dozens of species. But even with all their advanced technology, the aliens were losing badly. "We need every ship, every weapon, every soldier," Vexstar announced to the assembled aliens. His crystal body flickered with stress patterns that looked like cracks in ice. All member species must contribute to the war effort. Commander Thyses stood up, her metal feathers dulled with worry. "The Devourers adapt to everything we use against them. Plasma weapons, energy beams, quantum torpedoes, nothing works for long. They learn and grow stronger." Representative Gorth's stone body groaned like a mountain about to collapse. "We need new strategies, new weapons, new ideas. But where can we find them? What about the protected primitive zones?" Asked a small alien that looked like a walking flower. "Should we ask them to help too?" The room fell silent. The idea of asking primitive species for help was embarrassing. But the Devourers were getting closer to the main systems every day. "Send the message to everyone," Vexstar decided. "Even the primitives. We cannot afford to ignore any possible help." The message reached Earth within hours. It was a formal request for military assistance against an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. The message explained that every species must do their part to stop the DEVOURERS. President Elena Vasquez read the message to the United Earth Council. The room was filled with representatives from every nation on the planet. They had been preparing for this moment since Dr. Chun's first report. "They want our help," President Vasquez said. "The same aliens who called us too primitive to join their community are now asking us to fight their war." Admiral Marcus Torres stood up. He was an old soldier who had fought in the Mars colonial wars and the asteroid mining conflicts. His face was scarred from battles in the vacuum of space. "They need us," he said with a grim smile. "That changes everything." The Earth Council voted quickly. Humanity would offer to help fight the Devourers. They would send their entire space fleet and all available soldiers to defend the galaxy. The human response was sent within 6 hours. It was short and simple. "We volunteer our entire fleet and all available personnel for the defense of the galaxy." High Chancellor Vexstar received the message while planning the defense of the core worlds. He looked at the human offer and laughed. The sound was like crystal bells ringing in a storm. "Look at this," he told his advisors. "The primitive humans think they can help us fight the Devourers. They want to send their little metal ships against an enemy that destroys civilizations." Commander Thyses clicked her beak in amusement. "Their biggest ship has less firepower than our cargo haulers. What could they possibly do against the Devourers? Should we accept their offer?" asked one of the advisors. Vexstar made his decision quickly. He would respond to the humans personally, making sure they understood their place in the universe. He activated the communication system and looked directly into the camera. "Humans of Earth," he said, his crystal form glowing with condescending light. "Your enthusiasm is noted, but this is a matter for evolved civilizations. The Devourers are not like the small conflicts on your little planet. They are a force that can destroy entire star systems." He paused to let his words sink in. "Return to your planet and continue playing with your metal toys. Leave real warfare to species that have progressed beyond primitive chemical propulsion. Your rockets and missiles are no match for an enemy that has adapted to weapons you cannot even imagine." The transmission ended. Vexstar felt satisfied that he had handled the situation properly. The humans needed to understand that some problems were too big for primitive minds to solve. On Earth, the entire United Earth Council watched Vexstar's response in complete silence. The alien's words hung in the air like poison gas. Every human leader felt the same burning anger that Dr. Chun had experienced 6 months earlier. "Primitive chemical propulsion," Admiral Torres repeated slowly. His scarred face showed no emotion, but his voice carried the promise of violence. "Metal toys. I think it's time we reminded the galaxy exactly what humans have been doing with chemical propulsion for the past 1,000 years. Dr. Chun stood up from her seat. "They think our technology is primitive because they've forgotten what war really means. They fight with clean energy weapons and computer-guided missiles. They've never had to improvise, to adapt, to survive against impossible odds." President Vasquez called for a vote. "All in favor of Operation Galactic Education?" Every hand in the room rose at the same time. The vote was unanimous. "What exactly is Operation Galactic Education?" asked the representative from Japan. Admiral Torres smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "We're going to teach the galaxy that humans have been perfecting the art of making things explode since we first discovered fire. We're going to show them what happens when you insult a species that colonized Mars by strapping nuclear bombs to metal cans and lighting the fuse." Over the next few weeks, humanity prepared for war in their own unique way. While the aliens built bigger ships with stronger shields, humans focused on different things. They studied the Devourers' attack patterns, learned how their adaptive technology worked, and found weaknesses that the aliens had missed. Human engineers took apart captured Devourer technology and built their own versions. Human tacticians studied every battle report and found patterns in the enemy's behavior. Human scientists discovered that the Devourers' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. The aliens had tried to fight the Devourers like a conventional enemy. They used standard tactics, predictable strategies, and civilized rules of engagement. The Devourers had adapted to all of it, but humans had never fought a civilized war in their entire history. Every conflict in human experience had been messy, chaotic, and unpredictable. They specialized in fighting enemies that should have been impossible to defeat. The human expeditionary force assembled at the edge of Earth's solar system. 200 ships that looked like flying scrapyards compared to the sleek alien vessels. But appearances could be deceiving. Each human ship had been rebuilt from the inside out. Their hulls were reinforced with materials that could survive nuclear explosions. Their engines could produce thrust levels that would tear apart normal spacecraft. Their weapons were designed by a species that had turned war into an art form. Most importantly, each ship carried a crew that had grown up on stories of impossible victories. Humans who believed that any enemy could be defeated if he were smart enough, tough enough, and willing to sacrifice everything to win. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable. Around him, his crew prepared for a journey that would take them far from Earth. They might never see home again. But that did not matter. They had a job to do. "All ships, this is Admiral Torres." he announced over the fleet communication system. "The aliens think we're too primitive to help them. They think our chemical rockets and metal ships are toys compared to their advanced technology." He paused, looking out at the stars where an ancient enemy was consuming entire civilizations. "They're about to learn that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Sometimes you need a species that remembers how to fight dirty, how to improvise, and how to never give up, no matter how bad things get." The human fleet began its journey toward the war zone. Behind them, Earth continued its preparations. If Admiral Torres failed, the planet would be ready to defend itself. But if he succeeded, the galaxy would learn a lesson it would never forget. Confederation had wanted evolved civilizations to handle their crisis. They were about to discover that evolution sometimes meant going backward to the basics, to the fundamental truth that had kept humanity alive since the beginning of time. Survive at any cost. Adapt to any challenge. Never surrender to any enemy. The education was about to begin. The first lesson happened at what humans called the Kepler defense line. It was the Confederation's last major defensive position before the Devourers could reach the main systems. Alien warships floated in space like glittering jewels. There, energy shields creating rainbow patterns against the darkness. Fleet Commander Zolfig of the Hegemony Navy commanded 500 of the galaxy's most advanced warships. His people looked like tall, thin aliens with blue skin and large black eyes. They were known throughout the galaxy as master strategists and brilliant military minds. Zolfek studied his tactical displays with growing worry. Long-range sensors showed 300 Devourer bioships approaching at high speed. These were not the same creatures they had fought before. The Devourers had evolved again, adapting to every weapon the Confederation had used against them. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet," reported his communications officer. Zolfek looked at his screens and saw something that made him laugh, despite the serious situation. 200 human ships were approaching from behind, moving in what could only generously be called a formation. Their vessels looked like flying scrap heaps compared to his elegant warships. "Do not acknowledge their transmission," Zolfek ordered. "We have real work to do." Admiral Marcus Torres stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the alien fleet maintain its position at minimum safe distance. The Hegemony ships were beautiful but predictable. They followed standard military doctrine, maintained proper formations, and fought by the rules. "Admiral, the alien commander is ignoring our communications," reported his communications officer. Torres smiled grimly. "That's fine. We don't need his permission to do our job." He activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships. This is Torres. Weapons free. Show them what chemical propulsion can do." The human fleet suddenly accelerated past the alien ships at speeds that should have been impossible. Their fusion drives redlined beyond any safety parameter, pushing the limits of what their reinforced hulls could handle. Each ship became a kinetic missile screaming toward the approaching Devourer swarm. Zolfik watched in horror as the primitive human ships charged directly at the enemy. "They're committing suicide," he said to his bridge crew. "No shields, no energy weapons, just metal and momentum." But as the human ships approached the Devourer formation, something unexpected happened. At the last possible moment, they executed perfect barrel rolls, ejecting specially designed cargo pods directly into the enemy ranks. The pods spread out like seeds from a flower, each one following a different trajectory. The pods detonated in brilliant flashes of white light. But these were not ordinary explosions. They were antimatter-enhanced nuclear charges, specifically designed to disrupt the electromagnetic fields that held Devourer bioships together. The effect was immediate and devastating. Devourer vessels that had seemed indestructible began tearing themselves apart. Their adaptive hulls, which could heal from any conventional damage, started consuming themselves as their own systems turned against them. Within 15 minutes, the unstoppable devourer swarm was reduced to floating debris. Zalthek stared at his tactical display in complete shock. 300 enemy ships destroyed by 200 primitive vessels using chemical explosions. It should have been impossible. His communications officer spoke hesitantly. "Sir, Admiral Torres is transmitting." "Put him through," Zalthek said. Weekly Torres appeared on the main screen, standing calmly on his ship's bridge while damage reports scrolled past behind him. "Fleet Commander, this is Admiral Torres. The immediate threat has been neutralized." "How?" Zalthek asked. "How did? You know their weakness?" Torres looked directly at him with the expression of a teacher addressing a slow student. "You spent centuries learning how to fight civilized wars, Commander. We spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing things that want to kill us. There's a difference." The transmission ended, leaving Zalthek to stare at the debris. Field that had once been an unstoppable enemy force. The second lesson came 3 days later at the Threshold Gate, the Confederation's most heavily fortified choke point. Commander Theises of the Raptoran fleet commanded 800 warships equipped with the latest technology. Her bird-like features were sharp with concentration as she studied the approaching threat. The Devourers had evolved again. They're new. Bioships were immune to the antimatter charges that had destroyed the previous swarm. Their hulls could regenerate faster than conventional weapons could damage them. They had learned from their defeat and adapted accordingly. "Commander, the human fleet is requesting permission to assist," reported her tactical officer. Theises clicked her beak in annoyance. "They got lucky once. This is a real battle against a real enemy. Tell them to maintain distance and observe how professionals handle the situation." Captain Jessica Park commanded 50 human ships that looked even more battered than Admiral Torres's fleet. Her vessels carried obvious battle damage and temporary repairs that would have grounded them in any civilized navy. "Ma'am, the bird lady says we should stay back and watch," reported her communications officer. Captain Park looked at her tactical display, studying the approaching Devourer formation with the eyes of someone who had spent her career fighting. "Impossible odds. Roger that. Tell her we'll observe from an optimal firing position." The battle began badly for the Confederation forces. Tice's ships launched wave after wave of plasma bolts and quantum torpedoes, but the Devourer bioships shrugged off the damage and continued their advance. Their regenerative hulls healed as fast as the aliens could damage them. "All ships, concentrate fire on the lead vessel," Theises ordered, but it was useless. The enemy formation was systematically dismantling her fleet with weapons that adapted to every defensive measure. That was when Captain Park's voice cut across the tactical channel. "Raptoran fleet, maintain current position. We've got this." Theises began to object, but Park's squadron was already moving. Instead of attacking the Devourers directly, they began launching seemingly random objects into space. Old satellites, empty fuel containers, chunks of asteroid debris, all following ballistic trajectories that made no tactical sense. "What are they doing?" Theises demanded, watching the human ships scatter junk across the battlefield. The Devourers ignored the space debris, focusing their regenerative energy on healing damage from the Raptoran fleet's continued assault. There, bioships glowed with organic light as they channeled power into their self-repair systems. It was only when the first piece of debris impacted a Devourer vessel that Theises understood. Each piece of junk carried a small nuclear warhead on a timer. But that was not their real purpose. Hidden within the debris were clouds of self-replicating nanobots programmed with one simple directive: consume everything with a specific bioelectrical signature. The nanobots spread through the enemy formation like a plague, carried by the Devourer's own movement. They invaded the bioship's regenerative systems, turning healing into destruction. The creature's greatest strength became their greatest weakness as their own. Repair mechanisms began cannibalizing their hulls. Devourer vessels that had seemed invincible began consuming themselves from the inside out. Their adaptive technology, faced with microscopic enemies that multiplied faster than they could be eliminated, simply accelerated the process of self-destruction. Dyes watched in amazement as 150 Devourer bioships destroyed themselves in a chain reaction of corrupted regeneration. Her tactical display showed impossible readings as enemy vessels literally ate themselves alive. "Captain Park," she transmitted weakly, "where did you learn to fight like this?" Park's response was matter-of-fact. "Earth, Commander. We call it pest control." News of humanity's victories spread throughout Confederation space faster than light-speed communications. Every alien species heard the same impossible story. Primitive humans with chemical rockets had defeated enemies that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations could not stop. But in the halls of Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council's reaction was not gratitude. High Chancellor Vextar paced his crystal chambers like a caged predator, his body flickering with patterns of anger and fear. How is this possible? He demanded of his intelligence advisors. They're primitives. They fight with chemical explosions and metal projectiles. "Sir," reported his chief analyst, "our investigation suggests that humans have been developing these tactics for their entire history. Every war, every conflict, every act of violence has contributed to an ever-evolving doctrine of adaptive warfare." Vextar stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" While other species achieved peace and technological advancement, humans continued to prepare for threats that did not yet exist. They study warfare the way we study art or philosophy. To them, every enemy is a puzzle to be solved through violence and creativity. The implications struck Vextar like a physical blow. If humans could defeat the Devourers so easily, what did that say about the rest of the galaxy? How had they become so weak while a primitive species mastered the art of survival? "Sir, there's something else," the analyst continued nervously. "The humans are requesting formal recognition as a military ally. They want to be included in strategic planning for the war effort." High Chancellor Vextar stood alone in his private chambers aboard Nexus Prime, staring at intelligence reports that filled him with cold fear. The data was impossible to ignore, even though it challenged everything he believed about civilization and warfare. Humanity had not developed their advanced tactics recently. According to the Confederation's best analysts, humans had been refining these strategies for thousands of years. Every war in their history, every conflict between nations, every act of violence had contributed to an ever-growing knowledge of how to kill efficiently. While other species achieved peace and focused on art, science, and philosophy, humans continued to study warfare. They treated violence like other civilizations treated mathematics or poetry, as a subject worthy of deep study and constant improvement. The reports contained detailed analyses of human military history. Ancient battles where small armies defeated much larger forces through clever tactics. Medieval sieges that lasted for years, teaching patience and endurance. Modern wars that introduced new technologies and strategies at breakneck speed. But what terrified Vextar most was not humanity's skill at warfare. It was their skill at learning from defeat. Every time humans lost a battle, they studied what went wrong and developed new methods to ensure it never happened again. They turned failure into education and weakness into strength. The Confederation had achieved peace by avoiding conflict. Humans had achieved something much more dangerous. They had learned to win conflicts that should have been impossible to survive. Vextar activated his secure communication system and called an emergency meeting of the Inner Council. Only the most powerful leaders in the galaxy would attend this session. What he was about to propose required absolute secrecy, Within hours, holographic projections of the galaxy's most influential beings filled his chamber. Commander Thyses appeared as a shimmering image of metal feathers and sharp talons. Representative Gorth manifested as a mountain of living stone. Fleet Admiral Kess of the Thay. Energy Collective materialized as pure light given form. "We have a problem," Vexstar announced without ceremony. "The humans are becoming too powerful." "You mean the primitives who saved our fleets?" asked Admiral Kess, her light form flickering with confusion. "They have proven themselves valuable allies." "That's exactly the problem," Vexstar replied. "They are not our allies. They are a threat we have been too blind to see." He activated the intelligence files, filling the chamber with holographic displays of human military history. "Look at these records. Humans have spent their entire existence perfecting the art of war. While we built peaceful civilizations, they built weapons. While we developed culture and philosophy, they developed ways to kill more efficiently." Commander Thyses studied the data with her sharp military mind. "Their tactics are effective, but they are still primitive. Chemical rockets, metal projectiles, nuclear explosives. These are ancient technologies." "Ancient but deadly," Vexstar countered. "They defeated the Devourers using weapons we had dismissed as obsolete." "What does that say about our own capabilities? What does it say about the worth of our advanced technology?" Representative Gorth's stone form rumbled with deep tones. "You fear that other species will question our leadership." "I fear much more than that," Vexstar said. "If humans can defeat enemies that we cannot, how long before they decide that we are the problem? How long before they turn their weapons on us?" The inner council fell silent. The same thought had occurred to all of them, but none had been willing to speak it aloud. Humanity's victories were impressive, but they also revealed how weak the Confederation had become. "What do you propose?" asked Admiral Kess. Vexstar's crystal form pulsed with calculated light. "We give them a mission that will solve both our problems. The Devourers have retreated to their homeworld to regroup. Someone needs to lead the final assault, a dangerous, probably suicidal mission that requires the best tactical minds in the galaxy." "You want to send the humans on a suicide mission," Commander Thyses said bluntly. "I want to give them the honor they deserve," Vexstar replied smoothly. "They will lead the assault on the Devourer homeworld. When they die gloriously in battle, we can mourn their sacrifice while ensuring they never pose a threat to galactic stability." The vote was close, but Vexstar's proposal passed. The humans would be given command of the final assault against the Devourers. They would have minimal support, impossible objectives, and outdated intelligence. It was a mission designed to fail. Admiral Marcus Torres received the order while his fleet prepared for their next engagement. The mission parameters were clearly designed for failure: insufficient support ships, an impossible timeline, and intelligence data that was months out of date. Torres had seen similar setups before during the corporate wars of the 22nd century. Ambitious executives would send rival commanders on suicide missions disguised as promotions. The pattern was always the same: offer glory while ensuring defeat. "Dr. Chun, I need your analysis of these mission orders," Torres said to his chief intelligence officer, Dr. Sarah. Chun studied the data with the same cold precision she had shown months earlier at Nexus Prime. Her translation programs had been monitoring Confederation communications constantly, learning more about alien politics and hidden agendas. "It's a trap, Admiral," she reported. "The Confederation leadership wants us dead. They would rather see humanity destroyed than admit they were wrong about our capabilities." Torres nodded grimly. He had expected as much. The aliens' pride would never allow them to acknowledge that primitives could succeed where advanced civilizations had failed. "What about the mission itself?" he asked. "Is there any chance of success?" Dr. Chun pulled up detailed scans of the Devourer homeworld. The planet is heavily defended, but there's something the Confederation doesn't understand about our enemy. The Devourers aren't just parasites. They're something much more dangerous. She highlighted sections of the intelligence data, pointing out patterns that the aliens had missed. Look at their adaptation speed, their regenerative capabilities, their ability to evolve in response to threats. This isn't natural evolution. They're accessing something external. What do you mean? I think the Devourers exist partially in our dimension and partially in a parallel space. When we kill them in one reality, they simply shift to another version of themselves where they survived. That's how they adapt so quickly. They're learning from infinite alternate timelines. Torres stared at the data, understanding the implications. If you're right, then conventional warfare is useless against them. We can't kill something that exists in multiple realities simultaneously. Exactly. To truly defeat them, we would have to follow them into that parallel space. It would be a one-way trip with no guarantee of survival. Torres called an emergency meeting of his senior commanders. The briefing room filled with Earth's best military minds, men and women who had spent their careers preparing for impossible missions. Ladies and gentlemen, Torres began, we've been given a suicide mission disguised as an honor. The Confederation wants us to attack the Devourer homeworld with minimal support and outdated intelligence. Captain Park leaned forward. What's a real situation, Admiral? Worse than they think and better than they hope, Torres replied. Dr. Chun has discovered something about the Devourers that changes everything. They're not just advanced aliens. They're beings that exist across multiple dimensions. He explained Dr. Chun's theory about parallel realities and the Devourers' ability to access alternate versions of themselves. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. So how do we fight something like that? Asked Captain Williams of the destroyer Relentless. We follow them into their own dimension, Torres said simply. We take the fight to a place where our usual rules don't apply. The vote was unanimous. Operation Final Lesson would proceed as planned, but with humanity's own objectives. They would assault the Devourer homeworld, but not for the glory of the Confederation. They would do it to prove once and for all that humans deserved their place in the galaxy dot over the next month. Human engineers worked around the clock to modify their ships for dimensional travel. They reverse-engineered captured Devourer technology, built experimental breach generators, and prepared for a journey into unknown space. The Confederation leadership watched these preparations with satisfaction. The humans were throwing themselves into their suicide mission with typical primitive enthusiasm. Soon the problem would solve itself. What they did not understand was that humanity had been preparing for this moment since their first rejection. At Nexus Prime, every battle, every victory, every lesson learned had been building toward a final confrontation that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of power and civilization. Dr. Chun worked 18-hour days analyzing Devourer technology and parallel dimension theory. She had not forgotten the insults she heard at that first alien meeting. Every calculation, every experiment, every breakthrough was motivated by the memory of their laughter. The Confederation thinks they're sending us to die, she told Admiral Torres during one of their late-night planning sessions. They don't understand that humans don't just fight to win. We fight to prove that we. The assault on the Devourer homeworld began exactly as the Confederation had predicted, with overwhelming odds and almost no chance of success. Admiral Torres led 300 human ships toward a planet that had consumed the resources of 17 dead civilizations. The Devourer homeworld was a nightmare made real. Once it had been a beautiful planet with blue oceans and green continents. Now it was a pulsing mass of organic metal that grew like a cancer across the surface. Massive bioships launched from the planet like antibodies defending a diseased Body.High Chancellor Vicstar watched the battle feed from his private chambers aboard Nexus Prime. He had already prepared humanity's memorial plaque and composed his speech about their brave sacrifice. In his mind, the human problem would be solved within hours. Orbital sensors detected over 50,000 Devourer bioships protecting their spawning ground. Each vessel was larger and more advanced than anything the humans had faced before. These were not the scouts and raiders that had attacked Confederation space. These were the apex predators of a species that had evolved to consume entire galaxies. The first phase unfolded exactly as Vextar expected. Human ships engaged the outer defense perimeter, their unconventional tactics creating chaos in the Devourer formations. But there were simply too many enemies. The mathematics of warfare were brutal and unforgiving. One by one, human vessels disappeared in brilliant explosions. The destroyer Relentless took down 12 enemy ships before being overwhelmed. Cruiser Indomitable held its position for 20 minutes against impossible odds before its hull finally gave way. Each crew died far from home for a galaxy that considered them expendable. Vextar watched the destruction with satisfaction, mixed with something that might have been regret. The humans had fought well, but they were primitives facing an enemy that had consumed civilizations far more advanced than Earth. Then Admiral Torres sent his final transmission. To the Galactic Confederation Council, Torres said, his image appearing on every screen in Nexus Prime. Behind him, his ship's bridge showed damage from countless impacts, but his voice remained steady. You wanted to see what primitive humans could accomplish. Pay attention. The entire human fleet suddenly changed course. Instead of fighting the Devourer ships, they accelerated directly toward the planet's surface. Their damaged vessels screamed through the atmosphere like falling stars, trailing fire and debris. They're committing suicide, Vextar said to his advisors. A final desperate gesture from a defeated species. But Dr. Sarah Chun had spent months preparing for this moment. Each human ship carried more than conventional weapons. Hidden in their cargo holds were dimensional breach generators, experimental devices reverse-engineered from captured Devourer technology. As the ships impacted the planet's surface, they tore holes in the fabric of space-time itself. Reality began to bleed as the barriers between dimensions collapsed like a house of cards. The Devourer homeworld, existing simultaneously in multiple realities, started to tear itself apart from the spatial paradox. Vextar stared at his screens, in horror as the impossible happened. The dimensional breaches were revealing something that the Confederation had never suspected, the true scope of the Devourer threat. Through the tears in reality, he could see infinite versions of the Devourer. Homeworld. In some dimensions, they had already consumed the entire galaxy. In others, they were just beginning their expansion. Across countless parallel universes, the Devourers were spreading like a disease through reality itself. But the dimensional breach revealed something else that made Vextar's crystal form crack with shock. More human ships were emerging from the rifts. Not reinforcements from Earth. These were alternate timeline versions of humanity's fleet. In one reality, humans had never left their solar system, but had built weapons that could crack planets. In another, they had conquered half the galaxy before encountering the Devourers. In yet another dimension, humanity had achieved perfect peace, but retained their warrior's spirit when faced with extinction. Across infinite possibilities, humanity remained fundamentally the same. They were the species that refused to surrender, that adapted to any threat, that turned their own diversity into strength. Every possible version of the human race had arrived to face the Devourers in their home dimension. Dr. Chun had been right about the enemy's nature, but she had underestimated humanity's response. When faced with an enemy that existed across multiple realities, humans had done what they always did. They had found a way to turn the enemy's strength against them. The battle that followed existed beyond conventional space and time. Human. Fleets from realities where they had developed different technologies fought alongside versions that had chosen different paths. Scientists who had devoted their lives to peace worked with warriors who knew only war. Every choice humanity had ever made or could have made converged into a single moment of unified purpose. The diversity that had always been their greatest strength became a weapon that the Devourers could not adapt to or understand. The Devourer hive mind, accustomed to accessing alternate versions of itself for tactical advantage, found itself facing an enemy that embodied infinite adaptation. For every strategy they deployed, humanity had a counter-strategy. For every evolution they attempted, human ingenuity found a way to exploit it. Admiral Torres, fighting alongside alternate versions of himself from dozens of different timelines, began to understand what was really happening. The Devourers were not evil in any conventional sense. They were a species driven mad by loss, consuming everything in a desperate attempt to fill a void that could never be filled. Dr. Chun, working with brilliant scientists from realities where she had made different choices, discovered the truth. The Devourers had once been a peaceful species called the Gardeners. Their original homeworld had been destroyed by a cosmic disaster they could not prevent. The trauma had driven them to madness, turning their ability to nurture life into an insatiable hunger to consume it. Humanity offered them something no other species could: understanding. Humans knew what it meant to lose everything, to fight against impossible odds, to be dismissed and underestimated by those who should have been allies. They recognized the pain behind the Devourer's endless hunger. Captain Park, leading a combined fleet of human vessels from 12 different realities, made the first contact with the Devourer hive mind. Her transmission was not a demand for surrender, but an offer of redemption. "We know what it's like to be alone," she said. "We know what it's like to lose everything and keep fighting anyway. But we also learned something else, that the best way to fill the empty places inside is to help others heal their own wounds." The response came not as words, but as images, emotions, and memories shared across dimensional barriers. The Devourers showed humanity their original world, a paradise of crystal cities and singing forests that had been consumed by a stellar explosion they could not prevent. In return, humans shared their own history of loss and recovery. Wars that had nearly destroyed them, but ultimately taught them compassion. Disasters that had claimed millions of lives, but brought survivors together in ways they had never imagined. The slow, painful process of learning that strength came not from avoiding pain, but from choosing what to do with it. The dimensional barriers began to seal themselves as the Devourer hive mind made its choice. Across countless realities, former enemies began the long work of healing wounds that spanned multiple universes. The consumption stopped. The hunger ended. The madness that had driven them for eons began to fade. Back in normal space, the Galactic Confederation faced an uncomfortable truth. Not only had humanity succeeded in their impossible mission, they had done it while embodying the very values the Confederation claimed to represent: courage, sacrifice, cooperation, and the willingness to find peaceful solutions, even in the darkest moments. Chancellor Vextar found himself in the unprecedented position of having to formally apologize to a species he had tried to eliminate. His resignation statement was brief: "Perhaps it is time for new leadership, from those who understand that true evolution means learning from our mistakes." The aftermath was swift but thorough. The Galactic Confederation restructured itself, with humanity as a founding member of the new government. Other species brought their impossible problems to human strategists, who had developed a reputation for finding solutions that should not exist. Dr. Sarah Chan stood before the assembled representatives of 400 species, delivering humanity's first formal address to the Galactic Council. She remembered the laughter and insults from that first meeting months earlier. Now the same chamber was filled with respectful silence. "You thought we were primitive because we still fought wars," she said. "What you didn't understand is that we fought them so we could learn how to end them. Every conflict taught us something new about cooperation, sacrifice, and the cost of peace." She looked directly at the seats where the Confederation's former leaders had once sat in judgment of her species. "You achieved harmony by avoiding difficult questions. We achieved wisdom by answering them. You became civilized by forgetting how to fight. We became human by learning when not to."